still awake, so that's good. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sure that was an interesting conversation. I wasn't listening, I was backstage, but I've been here probably 200 times, so I have a little bit of an idea of what it was like. He hasn't given a lecture for quite a few months. We've been doing Q&As for 90 minutes, answering questions from the crowd, but tonight he wanted to go back to the book, so I hope that was enlightening for you. We're going to sit here now and we're going to do about 20 minutes of questions and answers that you have put on Slido. I was thinking, just sitting down there, and a thought came to my mind, and I thought, okay, I'll share it with you. Now and then, Jordan and I have done magic mushrooms. Yeah. You know, back when we were in university, and then, like, even recently, so it was only about a couple of years ago. And my kids are grown, and I always take a moderate amount of mushrooms. I'm not an extremist in that regard, but I'm not scared of it either, so I take enough that I have my imagination is in the forefront. Anyway, I imagined a cathedral that was on top of me, and it was lit on both sides, and one was my daughter and the other was my son, and they formed a cathedral on top of me. And I thought, isn't that an interesting vision? And I just wanted to share that with you, because before, at the very beginning, when we outlined the essay app that my son has worked hard on working up and bringing to the public, and my daughter's Peterson Academy that she's starting to bring professors and offering courses to everyone. I'm very proud of them, and I realize that they are my future, they are our future, and I'm very grateful. And with that, I'll bring Dr. Peterson back on stage.
Well, I didn't know where you were going with that story. But you pulled it together pretty well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you listen and just see what comes up, right? Yeah. Okay, well, I didn't hear what you talked about, so I put down some questions.
Okay.
And you can do whatever you want with them.
All right.
All right. Dear Dr. Peterson, do you believe that mankind truly has free will? Or are our actions / thoughts all predetermined? If the latter, how do we find meaning in this?
It's not a matter of belief. The future is unpredictable, technically speaking. The universe is not deterministic, technically speaking. There isn't any dispute about that. You're not a clockwork machine. And the reason that we know that is because a clockwork machine can't compute the transforming horizon of the future. So, now whether or not that means we have free will, that's a different issue, because it's not exactly obvious what free will means, and it's obvious as well that to some degree our will is bounded. But it certainly does mean that whatever you are, you're not a deterministic clockwork machine. And whatever the universe is, it's not a deterministic clockwork machine. So, now, I said that's bounded. I can show you an action that's deterministic. So, this is called a ballistic movement. So, I'll do this. Okay, so it's a very rapid movement, and it's a complex movement because I accelerated my hand very rapidly, and I stopped it just before it hit this surface. And the amount of time it took for my hand to move from here to here is shorter than the amount of time it took for the message from my hand to get to my brain and back if I want to adjust the movement once it's released. And so to make a ballistic movement, I have to set up the action, and in a deterministic manner and then disinhibit it and let it run. And when it runs, I can't control it. That's why it's called a ballistic movement. A ballistic missile, intercontinental ballistic missile, is ballistic like a bullet because once you shoot it, you can't control what it does. And so it does look like as we implement our actions, the horizon of possibility collapses into a deterministic actuality. But the farther out into the future we look, the less determined our perceptions and actions necessarily become. So, and we don't, well, I'll leave it at that. So, I can give you a contrary vision that's associated with what I talked about tonight. You're not a clockwork machine. What are you? You're a visionary. So, and to understand that, you have to reconfigure how you think about the world, because most of you undoubtedly think like scientific materialists, at least in part. You're probably not very good at thinking like scientific materialists, but because very few people think scientifically in a very thorough manner, but still the basic architecture of your thought is going to be of that not nature. And so you think there are objects in the world, and you think that you react to the objects and in a deterministic way, and none of that's true. You don't see objects that are objective. You see patterns that are functional, and they don't determine your action because you're not a clockwork machine driven by stimulus. All of that's wrong. Imagine what you confront when you wake up in the morning. You might say, well, I wake up in my bedroom and I confront the furniture. It's like, that's sort of like thinking that, imagine you're at a theater and you're watching a play and the stage is set with the props. And the actors come on and they say their lines and you say, the props caused that. Like, none of that's even vaguely true. And you know, the props in a play aren't objects either. They're facilitators of the symbolic message of the play. And I think you can say that about the objects in the actual world. They're not objects, they're facilitators of the symbolic meaning of the play. And then what do you confront when you wake up in the morning? Well, it's not the damn furniture in your room. It's the possibility of the day. You know, the possibility of the day makes itself manifest to you, and it presents itself as a problem. How will I interact with what's transforming in front of me in a manner that will bring about the desired end? And you might be very bad at that, which just means you're impulsive, and after the realization of very short-term visions, and so you're more hedonistic and immature in your visionary orientation, or you're sophisticated and you integrate the possibility that makes itself manifest to you with a higher order and sophisticated vision. And then you grapple or wrestle with that emergent possibility to realize it. And by doing that, you participate in the creation of the world. And the fact that you're of that kind is the reason, for example, that our culture is predicated on the idea that you're made in the image of God. Because God is the spirit that confronts chaos and possibility and transforms it into habitable reality. And that's you, in the microcosm. And that's a divine thing that you're participating in. And you can tell that because if you do it right, it's deeply meaningful. And you can tell that because if you do it right and it's deeply meaningful, the habitable order that you generate from the encounter with chaos and potential is good. And so the word that manifests itself at the beginning of time, the creative word, confronts potential, the tohu vabohu, the wasteland, the water, the deep, all of that, symbolic representation of potential, uses truth and love to shape that potential and produces the order that is good. And that's why it says in Genesis, repeated over and over after each day of creation. And God saw what he had created, and it was good. And so if you're oriented properly in your life, when you contend with the transforming horizon of the future, which is the entrance of becoming into being, that's another way of thinking about it, then you contend with that as a high-order ethical actor, and you transform that potential into the habitable order that is good. And that's the sine qua non of ethical action. And we all recognize it as such. So that's the answer to that question.
If the foundation of society is family, where do you see the breakdown of family happening? And what can we do as individuals to help build society back?
I think a big part of the breakdown in the family is our idiot concept of our idiotically one-sided conception of right and freedom. It's something like that. And the reason I say that is because, well, let's say, why would you be disinclined to engage in the process of building a stable family? And one answer might be, well, you're just utterly useless, right? You can barely take care of yourself, much less someone else. But let's leave that aside for a moment, although that might be a contributing problem. That's just sheer inability. Another problem would be, well, it's kind of an immature hedonism in some sense. Why would I want the burden of a family? Why would I want the constraints of a permanent relationship when I can have all the freedom to choose? It's like, well, first of all, why do you think that a family is a burden? And second, why do you think that all that choice, which I doubt you have anyways, is freedom? Well, like many people say, well, you know, I don't want to limit myself to one partner. It's like, no, you don't want to limit yourself to one partner, but pretty much everyone else wants to limit you to maybe even less than one partner. So it's a deep immaturity and ignorance that's gripped us because we don't understand. Here's something we don't understand. We don't understand. It's a three-part set of propositions, theses. You need a meaning to sustain you in the face of suffering, or you become bitter and nihilistic and malevolent and hopeless. The meaning that will sustain you through suffering is to be found in the adoption of responsibility. Now, every time I've said that, and it happened again tonight, every single person goes silent. Why? It's because no one said that for 60 years. And everyone knows it. You think, well, and I can be very concrete about this. My wife and I both were very ill over the last 3 years. My daughter was also very ill. And ill in a very brutal way. And ill in a brutal way that unfolded over months and years. And we've had ample opportunity to reflect on what made that bearable to the degree that it was bearable. And the answer is pretty clear. What made it bearable? The love we had for our children, the love we had for each other, the love we had for our friends, and mutually so, the love that was reflected back to us by the broader community. When Tammy was in the hospital, she was in the hospital extensively in 2019. And there were people sending prayers, essentially, from all over the world. My sister would print them out in the morning and put them on the hospital room. Hotel. It was no hotel. Hospital room. And all of that, and my family, not just my kids, my wife, my friends, my parents, my siblings, all pulled together in a remarkable way. And Well, I'll tell you a story, or you can tell the story if
No,
you
you
want.
go ahead.
You want me to tell the story?
You're on a
Okay.
roll.
Well, Tammy was diagnosed with a very slow-growing form of cancer in 2018, and we were assured that it was nothing to worry about. And then she had surgery for the cancer, and then when we came back a month later, she had some pain in her side near the surgical site, and we were informed within the span of about 10 minutes that she had been misdiagnosed and that the cancer she had was not only fatal, but 100% fatal, extremely rare, 100% fatal within 11 months. And so that was rather shocking, as you might imagine. And so Tammy reacted to that with her customary bravery and grace, and in some sense accepted it. And as she told me, many of her relatives had died in their late 50s, and she had learned to accept that as part of the potential natural course of events. But then she went and told our son, and he wasn't nearly as sanguine about it as she was. And she realized that the significance of her life wasn't precisely to be measured by its significance to her, that it had its own intrinsic significance, and that it was possible that her son saw that even more clearly than she did. And I would say, being an observer of both of them, that part of the reason that experience made itself manifest is because Tammy really loves her son and was a very good mother to him. And in all possible regards, I would say, and that was reflected back to her, that responsibility that she had taken was reflected back to her in that moment. And that was, I would say, a cardinal part of her decision to do whatever was necessary to survive. Now, why she survived is a complicated issue, and we don't know, except that she did. But that's just a small story about where the meaning that sustains you come from. You know, if you're in pain, if you're suffering, if you're deteriorating, if you're desperate, you're fortunate if you have a web of relationships that you've cultivated to buoy you up. That's what you have in a marriage if you make the right sacrifices, and you're fortunate. So I would say, well, why take responsibility? Well, because that's where you find meaning. You find the meaning there that will sustain you through the catastrophe of your life. And the more you bear that responsibility, the more meaning will be there when you need it. And then I would say, too, there's an idea that's deeply embedded in our culture, it's an extraordinarily deep idea, that it's incumbent upon all of us to voluntarily bear our crosses as we stumble uphill. And that's a celebration of the heaviest possible responsibility, right? To take on yourself the literal burden of betrayal, death, pain, torment, tyranny, atrocity, all of that. To take that on voluntarily, to lift it onto your shoulders, and to walk uphill. And perversely and paradoxically, it's in the willingness to adopt that responsibility that you find the meaning that allows you to bear precisely that load. And that's the answer to that question.
So we've only got a few minutes left.
I'll be quick. Probably not.
Okay.
Okay.
What is a woman?
Oh! I figured out the answer to that today. If it has a prostate, it's not a woman. All right. Very funny, by the way. Well, thank you all very much for coming. It's been a pleasure to talk to you all, and appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you, dear. Good to see you all. Thank you.